Welcome back to Dirt Obsession, everyone. Today we're going to look at the 600 to 700 class of ATVs, and I know what you're thinking. Thank God this isn't one of those AI-generated scripts from one of those anonymous YouTube channels that somehow crept into my algorithm. And no, sir, this is Dirt Obsession, the channel dedicated to ATVs and run by guys who actually live for and stay in near crippling debt because of ATVs. Today we're specifically looking at the big single-cylinder ATVs, a class that at one time was dominated by the Japanese OEMs, but also a class that offers a great mix of value and performance without totally breaking the bank. I did a similar comparison to this about 4 or 5 years ago where we looked at the Grizzly 700, KingQuad 750, Rincon 680, and the Brute Force 750, but in 2024 the landscape of this class has changed significantly, at least significantly in terms of the ATV market. Can-Am jumped into the big single mix with the all-new Outlander 700. Arctic Cat came in back in 2022-ish with the Alterra 600, and Cfmoto has become much more of a contender nationwide in the last 5 years. We've also lost a few machines that had at one point changed the comparative dynamic, with Kawasaki dropping the twin-cylinder 750cc Brute Force, Can-Am pulling the twin-cylinder 650cc Outlander, at least in its traditional trim packages, and as of right now there's no Rincon 680 from Honda for 2024. I hope the Brute Force comes back updated. There's rumors about a single-cylinder release for FY25, but that rumor's coming from forums and not official sources. I'm pretty indifferent to the Rincon 680 coming back from Honda. I hate to see ATVs leave the market without a replacement, but the Rubicon is Honda's flagship, and the Rincon was pretty rudimentary even when it was first released about 20 years ago. So undoubtedly, our contenders have changed in 2024, so I suppose that can only mean one thing. It's time to rack and stack the remaining and new contenders to decide which are the best buys of 2024. Let's start with the 600s, and in this class we have two major contenders, Arctic Cat's Alterra and the Cfmoto Cforce. Arctic Cat's Alterra 600 comes in a few packages with the base model EPS starting price of $9,199. At that price point you get 25-inch tires on steel wheels, a fairly small front bumper that's probably more appropriately called a brush guard, ground clearance is great at 11.5 inches, and power output from the 600 single is rated at 45 horsepower, which is pretty close to the 700 class numbers. The downside of the base EPS model is that it does have four-wheel drive but does not have a locking front diff. That's a feature that many ATV enthusiasts consider essential, especially those frequently tackling mud or technical unpredictable terrain. Most buyers are more likely to upgrade to the Alterra LTD, which add features that most enthusiasts are looking for, with 27-inch tires on aluminum wheels, a more robust front bumper, a 3,500-pound Warn winch, composite rack covers over the steel racks of the base model, and selectable four-wheel drive with a locking front differential. All those extras bring the price up to $10,999. The Alterra sales are very likely being hampered by being in direct competition with the Cfmoto Cforce 600. Cfmoto's starting price is $7,399, and at that price you get most of the options of the Alterra LTD. The exceptions would be the 25-inch tires on the Cforce, which I personally prefer over taller tires anyway, and there isn't a front bumper, although I will say the front of the Cfmoto looks reasonably well protected even without adding a bumper compared to the Alterra. At the base price, the Cforce does include handguards, and the towing capacity is 450 pounds higher than the Alterra, which is typically an indication of frame strength and rigidity as opposed to the capacity of the engine. The engine itself is rated at the same 45 horsepower as the Alterra. One significant drawback to the Cfmoto is the weight. At 870 pounds, it's as heavy as many twin-cylinder Ultra bores, which very likely makes it feel just a little more sluggish than it otherwise would. That's 110 pounds more than the Alterra 600 EPS, but only 50 pounds more than the similarly spec'd Alterra LTD. If I had to guess, I'd say the Cforce is outselling the Alterra 600 by a significant margin. We certainly see more Cfmotos on the trail, and I'm not going to get into the personal politics of Chinese versus American-made machines. I certainly have my own opinions, but the only ones that matter on this channel are related to ATVs. I will say, regardless of where they come from, Cfmoto has certainly pushed their way to the top tier of ATV sales in the US, partly by apathy on the part of the competition, and primarily by expanding their dealer network, marketing their machines, and listening to customer feedback. Arctic Cat, on the other hand, has suffered from a bit of an identity crisis after being bought by Textron. Then they kind of devalued the brand in the eyes of enthusiasts by selling the same machines under the Tracker brand name. Ultimately, the only thing I personally found disappointing was that Textron, as a multi-billion-dollar multi-industrial company, has the capacity to do some serious R&D on their machines, and they haven't flexed any of that industrial might in bringing something wildly competitive to the market. I think the Alterra 600 is solid, don't get me wrong. I just think it was also a safe, analytics-based, boardroom-type decision focused on carving out market share as opposed to building anything inspiring or even class-leading. And that's fine. The same could certainly be said about the Cforce. But if you're coming from that angle, you better come competitively priced, because at $3,600 less expensive and similarly spec'd, the Cforce blows the Alterra out of the water on paper. Next up are the larger bore singles in the 700 class, and I think it's fair to make this distinction between 600 and 700 class machines because, generally speaking, we're seeing a noticeable bump in displacement that will translate to more performance. First up is the Argo Xplorer XR700 EPS, which starts at $9,399. It's powered by a 695cc single-cylinder engine with a single overhead cam. As most enthusiasts already know, this is a rebranded TGB, which is a Taiwanese ATV company with a solid reputation in Europe. It does have four-wheel drive with a diff lock, and the base model EPS comes with a 3,000-pound winch as standard equipment. On the high side, it's relatively lightweight, which shouldn't be a performance robbing at 736 pounds dry and 744 pounds wet, but its towing capacity is nothing to write home about at 1,000 pounds. The LE version bumps the price up to $9,999 and adds premium bodywork, handguards, and slightly taller 26-inch tires on aluminum wheels. The biggest challenge with an Argo ATV is going to be finding one. Their dealer support network seems to be the smallest on this list, but if you have a dealer in close proximity to you, this is definitely an ATV worth taking a look at. Next is Can-Am's new Outlander 700, and we'll use the DPS version for this comparison because almost every other machine on this list has power steering standard, and the Outlander 700 DPS comes in at $9,149. It's important to note that this machine is available without DPS for $1,000 less. This is one of the more exciting machines to hit the market, certainly within the last 4 to 5 years in my opinion, for a couple of reasons. First, it's incredibly customizable. Can-Am has a ton of optional packages and accessories. You can custom build these machines to your exact purpose straight from the factory. And secondly, it's easily the least expensive machine in the 700 class, while also being the most powerful ATV on this list. Even while sharing the same single-cylinder engine with the Outlander 500, although the configuration of the 650cc single puts out 50 horsepower with the 700 sticker on it. The Outlander's utility is ridiculously good. It has a towing capacity of over 1,800 pounds and a 9-gallon storage capacity, and I'm a huge fan of the depressed rear rack and the link queue attach system that Can-Am uses for accessories. I'll admit, I was worried about the handling on this machine when it first came out because it's fairly long at almost 87 inches and very heavy at 890 pounds, but by all accounts, its handling is phenomenal, even at 5 inches longer than a Grizzly 700, slightly more narrow, and almost 200 pounds heavier. I should point out that there have been some hiccups reported by Outlander 700 owners. The intelligent engine braking switch has failed on a few occasions, and some XMR owners have reported receiving the wrong intake tube on the air intake. I think those will prove to be first model year hiccups over time because we've had a lot of experience with the Outlanders in the past, and we've always found them to be very reliable. Suzuki caught me off guard with a later release than normal this year for their KingQuad 750. The 750 KingQuad wasn't initially released with the rest of Suzuki's ATV lineup, and in my original script, I had theorized that it was most likely to return with a late release. Thankfully, that proved true even earlier than expected because the KingQuad 750 is still an incredible contender in the big single class. Despite my earlier assertion of the Outlander being the most powerful in the class, with the KingQuad sticking around, the Outlander would be tied for most powerful. We reviewed the KingQuad 750 last year and did a shootout with the Grizzly 700. We really like the KingQuad. It's a solid all-around contender in the class with a proven track record of reliability. For 2024, the only change is the colors and the addition of some handguards. The KingQuad 750 with power steering comes in at $10,799. Like the Outlander, there's a non-power steering version for $1,100 less. The KingQuad's advantages are its power. It boasts the largest displacement on this list at 722 cc's, so it's not working as hard to make comparable power to the Outlander. It also has great fit and finish and build quality. The disadvantages are a lack of accessories for customization and very limited storage capacity. And finally, of course, we have Yamaha's Kodiak and Grizzly 700s. And I did a deeper dive into Yamaha's 2024 Grizzly and Kodiak 700 just a few months ago, so I'll hit the wave tops here and refer you to that video for a more in-depth look. The Kodiak 700 in its most basic trim comes in at $8,499, and at that price it doesn't have EPS, a headlight pod, or a locking front diff. The EPS version adds all of those features for $10,099, and the Kodiak EPS LE adds a winch, premium wheel and tire packages, and premium plastics for $11,099. The Kodiak is a more work and hunting oriented machine overall compared to the Grizzly. Its seat height is 3 inches shorter and it's about 2 inches more narrow, which makes it a little bit easier to get on and off as well as maneuver in tight spaces. It's still more than trail capable, and it shares most of the important stuff with its bigger brother, specifically the 686cc engine and the Ultramatic clutch. The Grizzly 700 has long been my favorite 4x4 ATV, and as I've mentioned before, it's typically the benchmark for comparison. I love the handling, agility, and reliability, and other than the Kodiak, it's the lightest machine on this list at 701 pounds. However, in fairness to the critics, there are some caveats. I'm not a fan of the 27-inch Maxxazilla tires that come on the SE or the XTR because the Grizzly's EPS and handling characteristics are ideal with smaller tires. Also, and probably more significantly, as the longtime class leader, the price is corresponding to its era of dominance, with the EPS model starting at $11,399. At that price, you're paying more for legend and legacy than the features because it's fairly basic aside from above-average styling and nice-looking aluminum wheels. The single greatest thing the Grizzly has going for it is its legendary reliability that goes back 25 years. That means it's going to take a while for the other machines I've listed so far to catch up. But admittedly, I bleed blue. So for a more direct comparison, check out my buds from Dirt Trax TV's comparison of the Grizzly 700 and Outlander 700, which I'll link at the end of this video. So that's the landscape for 2024, and I think it's hard to argue against the Cforce 600 in terms of value in the 600 class, or the Outlander 700 as a utility bomb dropped directly on... Whoa! Just realized what I was about to say. I'll rephrase. The Outlander 700, despite some first-year hiccups, is a huge value for all of its capability. But I want to know what your picks are. Let me know in the comments, and as always, hit us up with any questions you have, and I promise we'll go out of our way to answer as thoroughly as possible. Stay tuned for the 450 to 570 class coming up for the next video, and we'll see you right here on Dirt Obsession.